Vivian dedicated her life to peace.
It's darkest before the dawn. I like there to be a dawn, because if we continue the same path, it's going to stay dark forever.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Shriver, and I'm honored to welcome you to what I think is likely to be the most important conversation at the festival. We are here to welcome our three guests, as you've just met them on the video, Robi Damelin, Yonatan Zeigen, and Aziz Abu Sarah. We are here to have a conversation primarily about the inner work of the transformation of grief and suffering and trauma. The only opening comment I would like to make, I hope clear, is that we are not here to relitigate a political agenda. These guests, these extraordinary human beings, have traveled great distance to come here to share with you their own experiences. And so we hope in this difficult and very painful time to be able to manage a conversation that allows us to speak human to human at a level, whereas the great spiritual director Richard Rohr said, where we find our pain and we have two choices. We either transmit it or we transform it. You are in the presence, I'm in the presence, and I have been privileged to be in the presence over the recent days of these three extraordinary human beings who have lessons on the transformation of pain. Our protocol here is to allow these three extraordinary leaders almost all of the time to themselves. I've told them, you won't hear much from me, and that's a blessing. If we have time at the end, we'll have questions, but we may not. I just say that in advance. We'll see how the conversation goes. If it works, great, but if it doesn't, don't be disappointed. We'll have much to learn from the three of them. Robi is going to go first.
No.
She's going to go third. I don't want to say how she characterizes herself. There's a lot of humor in this group, too. Yonatan is going to go first. Aziz is going to go second, and then Robi's going to go third. Yonatan, over to you.
Okay. Thank you for inviting us and for you to sit in on our panel. So I'll tell my story because I think it kind of symbolizes what we're going through, for what we are going through now in Israel and Palestine. So my mother, Vivian Silver, she was born and raised in Canada, but in Winnipeg, and she decided to immigrate to Israel in 1974 as a part of a group in a youth movement, Habonim. And they came with a mission to reestablish a new kibbutz in Israel, Kibbutz Gezer. And she was a very special woman because she led a driven life, all of her life, since childhood. Everything she did was meaning-driven. And she came to Israel. She was very dedicated to gender equality in the beginning, but also to shared society between Arabs and Jews in Israel. And after a few years of living on Gezer and doing wonderful things there, we moved as a family. I was 2 years old to Kibbutz Be'eri, which is or was actually right on the Gaza border. And then she became a lot more involved because with proximity comes responsibility. She became a lot more involved in cross-border work. In '98, she became a CEO of an organization that now is, I think, one of the most prominent organizations in Israel that works in shared society, in the shared society field. But back then, they did a lot of projects in Gaza and in the West Bank, encounter groups and training. And after the Second Intifada broke out, it became more difficult, and they started putting an emphasis, her together with her partner Amal El-Sana, a Bedouin woman from the Negev, started putting emphasis on working, empowering the Bedouin community in Israel. And that was what she dedicated herself to. Shared society, peace building, and gender equality. And that was her whole world outside of being a mother. She was pretty good at that as well. And even better at being a grandmother. When in 2014 my first child was born, and she retired from her organization, and I thought, okay, it's time for her to knit sweaters. And for a minute she thought so too, but it wasn't the case, because the same year there was a war on Gaza, and my brother was actually in the reserve, and she got together with a group of other mothers and women, and they formed a big organization now, Women Wage Peace. And yeah, she never stopped. I think she was kind of addicted to this kind of work, which is a good addiction. And it wasn't the same for me. I grew up with these convictions, but when in my 20s, I was also kind of active. But life in Israel and Palestine drives you down. The prospects for peace are so slim, and there's no political vision. So I went into what I call a political coma. And years have passed, and then October 7th. And she didn't survive the massacre on Kibbutz Be'eri. I was with her on the phone, and all through the morning. It's so hard to describe the helpless feeling of parting from your loved one as they are being murdered live. But we did manage to say goodbye. And I was sitting there. I remember this feeling, sitting there in this silence, and left with this void, just pain. And Tim said, what do you do with pain? You can either transmit it or transform it. And that was my intersection. And it was very clear to me from the beginning that October 7th is a wake-up call. For me, it burst this fantasy that we can live normal lives, bourgeois lives in Israel and Palestine, while there's still the conflict and the occupation, and that it needs to end. And in order for that to end, I need to get involved, and not me personally, but all of us that are living there, because the outcome of violence, that is the outcome of prolonged war and of not having a political horizon, only feeds the monster of violence and pain and fundamentalism. And if we want different outcomes, we need to change our mindset, and we need to behave differently. So for me, it was a point in time where I sadly started wearing my mother's shoes, and she was tiny, so it's kind of put pressure on my on my feet. But
He's lovely.
but But this kind of burden, I feel like we all have to carry, because if we want our children not to have to carry this burden, we have to work hard now. So it was natural for me to join the parent circle, because the work there is Palestinians and Jews together acknowledging the fact that pain is universal, and that when we acknowledge each other's pain, we say that it is not acceptable to keep on paying these prices. So I quit my job and I'm invested in that. Like my mother before me, I started living a dedicated life, so my kids can be just stupid and bourgeois.
Thank you, Yonatan.
Thank you. So I'll start from saying I've known Vivian for many years. I remember 15 years ago when I founded my travel company, and I called her and I said, look, I'm starting this travel company and I don't know much about the South, so can you help me figure out what to do there? I knew the North well in the country, I knew Jerusalem and the center, but I didn't know the South very well, and she lived there. So I said, can you introduce me to people, help me build my company there? And for the next few months, we were talking all the time, and she was giving me tips and connecting me to tons of people. And so we've built that relationship. And hearing Yonatan today speak with me, this is the first time we meet and the first time we speak in public together. And it's very emotional, it's very moving to see you going in the same path. And I know it's extremely hard to do that, because I went through something somewhat similar, and I couldn't do what you did right away. It took me many years to get to a point of being willing to meet any Israeli, to be willing to meet any Jewish person, and to have this conversation. So I have a lot of respect for you and for what you're doing, Yonatan. I grew up in East Jerusalem. You saw earlier my photo with my older brother, Taysir. This is back in the days when I used to be good looking.
You had more hair.
Thank you, Robi. But I grew up in the time of the first Intifada. I remember first time going to school and then coming back and telling my mom I'm quitting school, and I had a very good argument why. We were fired at tear gas. I was 6, 7 years old, and I said, look, I thought it through. Education is not worth it. I don't think it's worth dying for a few books and reading and stuff. I thought it's a good argument, but my mom decided to give me an onion to help me overcome my fear. Anybody knows why? Because if you have an onion when you shot at tear gas and you put it close to your nose, it helps you not suffocate. And so that was my early memories of growing up in Jerusalem. I think part of what many people from the outside don't understand the trauma we all grew up with. And this becomes normal. It took me years to realize that you in America probably didn't grow up with an onion in your school bag that was more important than your homework and more important than pencils and pens and so on. But yeah, that's my first introduction. I was 9 years old. Taysir, who's in the photo here, was arrested from home on suspicion of throwing rocks. He was beaten up through the interrogation, which resulted in internal injuries. And when he was released, he ended up dying soon after his release as a result of it. He was 19 years old then. I was 10. And you can imagine being 10 years old. What would that do to you? And the way I felt, there's no choice. If somebody kills your brother, you fight back. It pretty much felt if I look at Robi here and I punch you in the face, what's the first thing people do? What's the reaction?
Punch back.
Punch back. She's honest. I know Americans, when I ask that question, they always go, well, you know. How many of you, if somebody punch you in the back, you take a few steps backward and you go, you know, let me think about this logically.
Non-violence.
Most of us don't. And when you're 10 years old, you definitely don't. And so for the next 8 years, that was my life. And when I was 18, I decided to go and study Hebrew, not out of wanting to, out of necessity. If you live in Jerusalem, you don't speak Hebrew, it's a big problem for work and life and so on. And so I studied in Ulpan, which is where Jewish immigrants go to study Hebrew in Jerusalem. And I was the only Palestinian in that classroom. And that was my first interaction, a normal human being interaction of an Israeli and a Palestinian together. And it was such a moving thing because I remember my teacher walking to me and realizing, you know, I sat like this, I had a plan, I'm going to learn Hebrew but not speak to anybody. I thought I was that smart. But she realized I was afraid and didn't feel comfortable, and she walked to me, big smile, and she spoke to me in Arabic, the few words she spoke in Arabic, and she said, welcome. And now thinking about it, that was the first time I had a normal human being interaction with an Israeli person. I've met soldiers, I've met settlers, and some soldiers were nice, but you know, if somebody carrying a gun, you don't have a normal dialogue with them, usually. And in that classroom, that happened. Me and the other students get to know each other, and I realized a couple of them liked something called Western country music. Any fans? I'm a big fan of country music. I'm maybe the only Palestinian who's a fan of country music. And in that classroom, I found a couple, not many Jews also like country music, by the way, but a couple did. And that was my start into this peace-building work, because I realized at that point I do have a choice, that I do have an agency, and that regardless of what others do to you, you always have the ability to make your own choice. You cannot say, I do it because they did it. Actually, every time I chose to hate, I was being a slave to the person who killed my brother. I justified my actions based on their actions. And it was so redeeming to say, I'm not going to do what you want me to do. You already killed my brother. You ruined my life. I'm not going to let you ruin my life anymore. And that's such a redeeming thing to do. For the next few years, I worked actually with Robi in the parent circle. I was the Palestinian chairman of the organization for a few years until Robi got tired of me.
The truth will out.
Yes. And for the last 20 plus years, this has been my work. I realized that what divides us isn't being an Israeli and a Palestinian. What divides us is that, you know, I think if we're going to divide ourselves in any way, it should be those of us who believe in justice, in equality, in peace, and those who don't, yet. And the work we are doing is about that yet, is about how do we reach out and show people that even in the worst of moments, we can work together. On October 8th or 9th, I got a phone call from a really good friend who does a lot of work in the West Bank, Anton Goodman. And he said, Aziz, I need your help. I have founded a nonprofit called Interact that does a lot of bridging the gap between different communities in Israel and Palestine, but also in other places around the world. I've actually worked in over 60 countries on conflict resolution, from Colombia to Afghanistan to Syria, because I thought Israel and Palestine was too easy. Go to Afghanistan. But I got a call from him, and he said, we need to help the Palestinian communities in the West Bank, because there were few communities that getting attacked by settlers who took advantage of the situation, and no one is watching what's going on. We need to get medicine, we need water, we need electricity, which we couldn't, like generators, gas, so on. We need all kind of things to get there. And I started working with him and putting some of those packages together. But Palestinians, we couldn't cross at that time. There were all kind of checkpoints where you couldn't go from Jerusalem even to the West Bank. So he would, in the morning, literally go to a funeral of one of his friends who was killed on October 7th, and in the afternoon, go and deliver food, medicine, so on, to his Palestinian friends and these villages in the West Bank. And to me, that's the essence. Peace is a nice word, but peace without action is meaningless. Peace is not confined to a conference room where we meet here and we have good conversation and we all say, yeah, we all pro-peace. But unless we have an action, something we do, then it doesn't lead to much. And that's, to me, the call, is that we all have to reflect on what is it that we can do. It doesn't mean, by the way, we're not angry. It doesn't mean we don't disagree. I'm sure the three of us have some disagreement. I am as pissed as you can imagine. I have friends in Gaza who lost 50 people in their families. I have one friend who pretty much his whole family has been wiped out. And I understand that pain. I understand where he's coming from. And when I watch the news every day, I am as pissed as many of you probably are. But it's about what you do with that anger. Do you let your anger fuel hate, or do you let it fuel the kind of work we are doing? To me, anger is like a nuclear power. It either leads to destruction or it leads to light and electricity. And it's our choice whether we want to do that or this. So the work we are doing here, individually, our organizations, is all meant to do that, to make our anger say, we will not let somebody else go through what we went through. We will do everything we can to actually bring people together, whether that's through webinars and seminars, whether through my travel company. We did a mission recently to Israel and Palestine. You know, there are tons of solidarity missions going there, but they're very one-sided solidarity missions. And we said, no, we're going to create solidarity mission that meets the people and support the peacemakers. And that's the brand we are saying. You know, regardless of our religion, nationality, whatever you want to put, identity, so on, we have one identity we all agree on. We are all here peacemakers, and we're here to invite you to be part of this peacemaking movement. Thank you.
Can I move this? I want to stand. So if I stand, you can see me? Because these chairs are dreadful.
She doesn't say what she thinks.
So it's so painful at the moment that, you know, your belief, your hopes, everything that you want are put to the test almost every day. For me, the 7th of October was almost the same as when my son was killed. I had this immediate reaction that I have to do something. I cannot stand by and watch this happen. I have to change the world. So I start traveling. This is my 3rd visit to America. I've been to Germany, Italy, where they felt it necessary to give me 2 guards. It was quite flattering. And also to Berlin and everywhere that you can possibly imagine. And the thing is that what I'm trying is to understand always why. How did this happen? The conflict didn't happen on the 7th of October. I'm sure you all know that. So understanding why the man who killed David did it is part of this healing for me. So when the army came to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, one of the first things that I said is, you can't kill anybody in the name of my child. I have no idea where that came from, but it was the first thing, apparently, that I said. And so that was like a kind of prophecy of what I would do with the rest of my life. I knew and there's not much left, by the way, and, you know, I just knew that I wanted to do something to prevent other mothers from experiencing this pain, because there's nothing like this. It doesn't go away. Don't believe people that it goes away. You learn to live with it next to you. And so the parents' circle found me and invited me to a weekend in East Jerusalem. And I came, and we were sitting around a table, and I looked into the eyes of the Palestinian mothers. And I realized that we shared the same pain, and that we could be the most incredible force if we stood on a stage and spoke together for reconciliation, for nonviolence, for ending the occupation, then surely that would be an example for others. I started traveling all over the world, and I thought I was really quite a big deal. You know, I could speak English, and people think I'm very clever because I speak English, but I happen to have been born in South Africa. So, and it was an extraordinary experience to travel with a Palestinian and to understand that this message is not local, it's international. And one night I'm sitting at my computer, and there's a knock on my door, and I open the door, and there are 3 soldiers. When there are 3 soldiers, it only means one thing. So I slammed the door in their face. And they kept knocking and knocking and knocking, and eventually I opened the door, and they said, "We came to tell you that we caught the man who killed David." That is when the shit hit the fan. Because that is when I became tested. Am I in integrity? Can I wander around the world talking about peace and love and read bad poetry, which most NGOs want to do? Or can I do this work? I must walk the talk. So I woke up one morning and wrote a letter to the family of the sniper, and I told them all about the parent circle. Today we are 700 families, and it's becoming more and more, unfortunately. Many from the 7th of October, and it's extraordinary to listen to Yonatan and to see how soon after this wonderful woman was killed. Believe me, nobody really gave justice to Vivian. She was an extraordinary woman. And I also told the family about David. He was a student at Tel Aviv University, and he was studying for his master's in the philosophy of education. That's obviously why I do what I do in many ways. And he was part of the peace movement, and he drank a lot of whiskey, and he played the French horn, which means that I deserve the Nobel Prize. It's not fun. And, but he was very, I suppose, you can't really value a dead hero. You know, you can't compete. And so ever since then, I also told the parents of Thaya, that's the name of the man who killed David, that we needed to meet. We owed that to our children and grandchildren. And so it took 3 years, and I got a letter back from the sniper in which he told me I'm crazy. And actually, Aziz translated the first letter into Arabic, and that I should stay away from his family, and that he killed 10 people to free Palestine. But you see, I knew from his parents that when he was a small child, he saw his uncle violently killed by the Israeli army, and he lost 2 uncles in the Second Intifada, the uprising. And so I understood why. It's not condoning. I don't condone any violence, but I understood why. And this is why I'm tying this up with a child that grows up in Gaza. If you're 14, right, you live in Gaza. Every 2 years there's a war. You don't have a shelter. You also have nowhere to run, and you watch your mother who can't protect your siblings, and she's running down the street. Just see this in your mind, and you see a little boy standing with his cat. This is the human side of conflict, and saying, I'm not leaving to the south unless you let me take my cat. You see all of these scenes, and you suddenly think to yourself, what kind of adult will this be, who has no freedom of movement, who has no hope? Hope is a very important equation of peace. And I look at the kids who lived on the kibbutz. They thought they were invincible. You know, they had masses of rockets, but they had safe rooms. And I was, a couple of weeks ago, in New Oz. I cannot describe to you how sad and how dreadful the sight of these homes with a little shoe and an old bicycle and things that are human. And so, when I got this letter back from the sniper in which he said I was crazy, I kind of knew that anyway. So I decided it was like giving up being a victim. I became free. That's an extraordinary experience. It's not about anything but being able to continue with the work. I went to South Africa, by now you realize my accent, and we made a film about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and for me, it was a personal journey of understanding the meaning of forgiving. If we had hours, which we don't, and it's damn hot in here, I could ask you what you mean when you say you forgive. It's a very interesting conversation. And so I met a woman whose daughter was killed, and she'd gone to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and said, I forgive you. What's that mean? You know, and I said, what do you mean when you say you forgive? And she said, for me, forgiving is giving up your just right to revenge. And I met the man who sent the people who killed her daughter. And he said, and if you don't hear anything today, listen to this. He said, by her forgiving me, she released me from the prison of my inhumanity. And so it's a very long story, and I usually talk too much, so I'm going to actually stop here. I've been trying to meet with the sniper, but he actually has to ask to meet me. That's the law. So I'm so grateful that you all sat here and listened to all of this. Thank you. And Tina, I see that you're in the back. I wanted to acknowledge you because for the past, 10 years or so, you've opened up so many doors for the parent circle and for me personally, and I'm really grateful to you. Thank you.
Anyone want to comment? You want me to ask a question, or? Yeah? Maybe just maybe an easy question. Can you tell us just a little more about the parent circle? I think for many of us, it might be a new label, a new organization. We don't at least we don't hear too much about it. Maybe you could just describe a little bit the work and the people.
So yes, we are 700 families now, and it's about half Palestinian, Israeli. What we want in the long term is to create a framework for a reconciliation process to be an integral part of any political future agreement. This all must sound very naive, but it isn't, because if we don't prepare people, we'll sign a peace agreement and the people will not be ready. So it's extraordinary that the government, in its great wisdom, decided to ban us from schools. We've been working in schools for something like 18 years, and encouraged by Ben Gvir and his band of hope and glory, they passed a rule to ban us from schools, where we do dialogue meetings, something like you see here, and which was the only cross-border peace NGO that could go into schools. So we took them to court, and I'm happy to tell you that we won. Yeah. And we got costs. How's that? So also they tried to stop our summer camp. We have a summer camp every year for something like 18 years, where we have Palestinian and Israeli bereaved kids get together. And I can tell you that they actually had a debate in Parliament. Really, this is true. They had a debate in Parliament to see whether we could have a summer camp for kids. Isn't that insane? So all my grandchildren go, and eventually what happened is the American government and the German government intervened, and we have the summer camp. And I have a grandson who's pretty spoiled. Well, that's the role of grandmothers. And at the end of the summer camp, he said, "This is the best week I've ever spent." And I wondered why. It's the alleviation of fear of the other, because they'd never met Palestinians. And so he recognized the joint love of, I don't like Western music, but of whatever music kids
I'll get
like.
you into country music.
But this was an extraordinary experience. And so on the 21st of September, these same kids signed a charter at the United Nations for nonviolence and reconciliation. And it was a wonderful ceremony. And 3 weeks later, the war. And kids are not nuanced. And so they really started to send the ugliest messages on social media. But you can't give up. So we worked with them separately. And after much, much drama, because they watch their news, we watch our news, it's a parallel universe. So you have to trust to be able to listen with empathy even if you don't agree. And so eventually they said, okay, we want to meet, but we can't have the summer camp. Why? Because there's a closure in the West Bank, but nobody's talking about that. That people are not free to go to work. That people are suffering from the economy, that people are suffering from the settlers. Can you imagine what it's like to live in a life of fear because the settlers would attack you? If we're talking about reconciliation, we have to tell the truth. You must bring this message. There is a cauldron in the West Bank just waiting to boil over. And so we decided this year that we're going to take all the kids to Cyprus, which we're going to do, and because they have to heal. And they will sit and they will make lunch for Greek Cypriot kids and for Turkish Cypriot kids. The main problem, I warned you. The thing that I really want to talk about is something that's very appropriate for this audience. Since October the 7th, the Parents Circle, the American Friends of the Parents Circle, maybe, Shiri, you'd like to come up now? The Friends have had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people asking us to come and give dialogue meetings all over. If the World Bank has to ask me and a Palestinian partner to come because the Jewish workers are not talking to the Palestinian, to the Muslim, that's somewhat pathetic. So we went, and we did, and we went to Georgetown University. Georgetown have been a wonderful mentor to the Parents Circle for many years. And we've created together an extraordinary online program which can go to all the universities in America, in fact, all over the world, which is a dialogue meeting, something like you see now, with question and answers and a wonderful manual that the facilitator can use, because many of the teachers have no idea what to do with all of this. And so I think, and we will have a website, it's an extraordinary opportunity. I met with NYU, with the president last week, and they're going to help us to launch this. And actually, believe it or not, I'm going to Houston. If you told me this, I would never believe you. In 3 weeks' time, because the American Union of Teachers are having a conference, and we're actually going to launch it there. So this is something practical, tangible, that if you have contacts, please talk to Shiri. It's really important. Okay, now I'm going to keep quiet. Thank you.
We've got about 10 more minutes. I want to bring up something that you all brought up on the call we had at the beginning, which was that you've had to risk belonging in your own community to continue to do this work, that you are sometimes feeling pushed out, whether it's Palestinian or Israeli communities, of your own community by continuing to be bridge builders in a time when many people, and many people in this country feel, I think many people who've experienced explosions in anti-Semitism and in Islamic prejudice feel that their only recourse is to double down on their own group. They're scared to be, because they're afraid of being ostracized. Can you just say a little bit about how you've managed to hold your in-group, if I can put it that way, your identity within your ethnic, religious, cultural backgrounds, and at the same time risk it in a time like this?
Yeah, I can. So my community, Be'eri, which is a very intimate community, we had around 1,000 people, residents, before October 7th, and 100 dead. So it's 10% of a community which is shattered, and the houses themselves. I mean, all of the community is displaced now, and then they have to hear me talk about peace and reconciliation and forgiveness and trust and ceasefire and stop the war. And it's difficult. But I found that if I can stand together with them and accept their discourse and their pain, because their talk, they have trauma talk now, which we see circumstances lead people into what they, like Aziz said, you get punched in the face, you want to punch back. So if I can hug my community and then go and do whatever I want to do, because I believe that it's in our best interest, that the only way for us, for them to heal, for me to heal, for Palestinians and Israelis to live in security and freedom is through peace. And it doesn't matter what we do, what we feel inside. I mean, our feeling, our internal world is not sterile. We can feel all the feelings on the spectrum. But if we are able to differentiate between feeling and intellect and what we do in the world itself, our actions, then that's what I chose to do. And the point is, I accept their feelings, but I act differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Aziz? Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, it's an extremely difficult time for most Palestinians right now, because no one I know who doesn't know someone who's either have a relative in Gaza or in the West Bank. You know, my next door neighbor was shot a week after October 7th in our neighborhood in Jerusalem. And so when you come out and start speaking about coexistence and peace and working together, people want to know, what the heck are you talking about? Because the first priority everyone says we need to have is stop bloodshed, stop the killing, that more people don't die. And so it's very difficult. But in the same time, I can't even tell you how many encouraging messages I've gotten. A month, 2 months ago, we were invited to go, a colleague of mine and I, an Israeli colleague of mine, to go meet Pope Francis. And I called a few Palestinian friends and I said, what do you think? What do you want me to say? And including the guy I just told you who lost 50 people in his family, he said, go to him, meet him, and tell him our story and tell him we need his help to stop this and to have an end of the occupation, an end to this conflict. He said, remind him of what Obama said right after October 7th. He said, if, you know, we all outraged now, but maybe we should have been outraged a year ago. Maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe 2 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And he said, I feel I could have done more, and there is a blood even on my hand. And I think that's, when I talk to Palestinians, this is a message I'm talking to them, is we together are stronger. I would also say what gives strength to my message is people like Yonatan and Robi and Maoz and my Israeli partners. Because when I go to them and say, here, the peace work I'm doing, they say, but where are the Israelis who are doing this? And when I show them somebody like Anton, who's going to help Palestinians the next day after October 7th, when I talk about, Yonatan saying, yeah, my mother was killed, but I don't want her and Robi to be used, our story, to be used to cause more death, that shocks people. Because we have this idea that the other side always doesn't want peace. We do, but they don't. And then we have a cultural element that does build on that. You know, we have so much poetry and writing and literature in Palestine that does push for peace, and I use that a lot. You have people like Samih al-Qasim, who has one of my favorite poems. He talks about the day, he has a poem says, the day I'm killed, my killer will rifle through my pockets and he will find 3 traveling tickets, one to peace, one to the fields and the rain, and one to the conscience of a humankind. I beg you, my killer, I beg you, do not waste such a thing. Do not ignore them. Please take these tickets and travel. So I build on those elements that we have in our culture and in our community. And I've gotten more support than angry messages in the last few months, even though I've been very vocal about my work.
So we're not going to have time for questions. I'm sorry. I think everyone on the panel has offered to stick around and continue the. Oh,
and one more thing.
Yeah.
So tonight, for those of you who want to ask questions, I'll be hanging out at the West Side Social with hopefully both Yonatan and Robi can join us after, let's say, 8:30. So please join us for a drink. And if you have any questions, come and talk to us then.
And we have.
Oh, we're not done. You have time. Go ahead.
I just have to tell you that we have bracelets. They are Morse code for peace, salam, and shalom. And Shiri will be very happy to give
wave
you
again.
one.
Yeah.
We'll be very happy to give you one.
For a very small price.
For a large price. Sorry.
I guess I just want to pick up on this identity question. You said the one identity you all share, many different identities. One you share is peacemakers. I'm going to venture that everyone in this room shares many, many identities, but one they probably all share is that we all would like to be peacemakers. You've watched the American scene, the protests, the counter-protests, the political rhetoric. How can we be peacemakers? What's our job?
To stop importing this conflict into your country.
Stop. Say it again.
Importing our conflict into your country.
Stop importing the conflict here. Yeah.
And start exporting solutions to us.
I think a bit different. I want people to care.
But I don't want them to import the conflict.
Yes, but I want people to care. I don't tell people stop being active, but be active in a way that supports bringing. Yeah, be angry at the U.S. government. I think there's a lot of reasons, by the way, to be angry at the U.S. government. Israelis and Palestinians are protesting now in Israel and Palestine. Some people could look at that and say, why are you protesting? Protests are good, but do not let protest become into violence or hate. I think there are some people who've done it well, and there are some people who've done it not as well. But also, I think the way I respond, because I've gone and talked to many of these protesters from Colombia to Washington, D.C., and I always say the main thing you have to do is understand people are angry and people in pain. And if you don't come to people who are angry and in pain with understanding, with love, with saying, I understand your pain and I understand your anger, it doesn't matter what you tell them, they will not listen. So I come to them and say, I understand where you're coming from. I understand your pain. Let's talk. Instead of coming telling them, you're wrong, you shouldn't be talking, you young, you stupid. That language never works, especially with young people, because I remember when I was 18 and my dad told me that, and I didn't listen.
Right.
Actually, I don't remember when I was 18. But I think what is very important to say to the students particularly, look, this is the first time that Palestine has been on the map for so many years. What if instead of breaking windows and waving flags, you would actually support all the organizations on the ground, Combatants for Peace, Peace Now, our organization, Parent Circle, and Breaking the Silence, Women Wage Peace. There's so many. Choose one and support them, because they're the people on the ground that can make a difference in the life of Aziz and me and Yonatan. The rest just doesn't help anything. It makes you feel good about yourself. That's why we created this program, and I'm hoping you'll pick it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Last word, Yonatan, yeah?
I think that what it means to me to say stop importing the conflict is that the only way for us, Palestinians and Israelis, to live a secure and free life in Israel and Palestine is to acknowledge that we have a bloody past, which is kind of separate, but our future is shared. So if there are protests in places that those people don't pay the price, and they are not able to be, instead of pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, pro-peace together and to export those solutions to us, then they're counterproductive. And we need that. We need to see this horizon coming from the outside, from people and from the establishment, from the American establishment and from the European establishment, to create an international coalition to invest in that, in us.
I dare say this has been a masterclass in the transformation of human pain and suffering by people who know it and who have lived it and who are here to teach us, each of us in our own space and time, a path that many of us might aspire to but maybe didn't understand, but today we understand more deeply. So let me ask the entire group here to thank these extraordinary people.
Thank you.
Thank you.